No. Stability? So I think there's different parts of it. So the question was, how stable is OpenStack? So I think the core parts of it are very stable. There are people running it at very large sites today, whether it's HP or Rackspace or DreamHost or a number of places out there that are running tens of thousands of machines on it. As long as you're on Nova and a set configuration and you're using some of the older stuff like Swift and things like that, I think it's very stable. When you get to the newest stuff, like Salometer or Heat or the things which are just coming out, those are probably less stable. They're just less mature today. I think over time they'll get more mature, but as long as you're staying with the core pieces, I think it's very mature, and I think people are doing, are showing that with their services. But it's certainly not every configuration of it, because there's a lot of configuration options, and it's not every one of the projects.
If I need to upgrade the OpenStack version, what is the best way?
Yeah, so the question there was about upgrading. So upgrading OpenStack has always been, at least in the past, has been somewhat problematic. And the reason is that each one of the releases has a slightly different database schema, and each one of your nodes needed to talk to the database. And so when they talked to the database and they found a different schema, they didn't like that and they tended to crash. And so you had to upgrade all of your nodes at once, which if you have 3 nodes, not a big deal. If you have 300 nodes, well, that's a big deal. So we've done some work in Grizzly, and part of what I talked about Nova Conductor, where Nova Compute no longer talks to the database, part of that was security, but the other part of it was so that we don't break it when we try to upgrade. So now, since each one of the compute nodes only talks to Nova Conductor, they don't see the schema, and so when you upgrade them, they don't have the problem about crashing each time you do the upgrades. So I think the upgrade from Grizzly to Havana is going to be easier. There'll probably still be some problems with it that we haven't seen, but I think it's gotten much better than it was back in, say, Folsom and things like that. Swift, on the other hand, Swift's always been easy to upgrade. Really, you just kind of upgrade the binaries, and we've done upgrades in place. We just take one node off at a time and do the upgrades, and really have never had a problem with that.
다른 질문은 없으세요? Yes, I have one question. In your experience, the most of headache in OpenStack is block storage component. Then, for general purpose, what is the best practice?
So the question there was, if block storage is one of the bigger problems, what's the best practices with block storage? So I think the best practice today with block storage is keeping it as simple as possible. Storage can be really complicated, and a lot of people try to make it more complicated. Try to keep it very simple. Make sure that you have good management tools to troubleshoot it. So it can be very difficult to troubleshoot because you have so many either iSCSI or storage boxes out there. Just finding where you have the problem can be very difficult sometimes. And make sure that you keep up to date on your firmware and things. A lot of the problems are actually below OpenStack. They're actually a firmware problem or a drive problem. And it's really hard to diagnose those when you have a lot of machines out there. So if you can keep your machines up to date and keep your configurations fairly simple, I think that helps a lot.
What is the meaning of simple in your words? Could you give some more information?
So what does simple mean?
Yes.
So for me, simple means I've used one set of hardware, hopefully all the same. The configurations are being managed by something like Chef or Puppet, so that all the configurations are the same. If you find, almost inevitably when we have a problem with one of our storage servers, we'd go find that server, and for some reason someone had done something by hand on it, and it had a different config. Almost always that was exactly the problem. It always took us like 2 hours to find out that was the problem, but it was almost always the problem. So configuration management, keeping the firmware, and then keeping things as uniform as possible. Those were the things that helped us the most on that. It's when we had to troubleshoot different firmware versions and different machines and things done by hand, that was the real problems. Yes? I'm sorry, I only heard part of it. OpenStack's API? API is slow in performance. So Nova API is built on, it's a Python web server basically. In general, you want to put a real web server in front of that, especially if you're doing SSL. SSL done purely in Python is very slow and does not scale very well. What we used to do is put something in front of that, either some kind of proxy server, reverse proxy server, or a real web server in front of that, and all of the SSL termination would be done there, and then that would offload it so that only behind that you would actually get the processing there. HP has done some presentations on increasing the performance on that, but that is a concern there. Right now you can only just throw more boxes at it or terminate SSL in front of it. A lot of that's just because Python is probably not the fastest language for web serving, but a lot of that is the SSL. So if you can do some kind of SSL offload, that will help a lot. I think HP saw something like a 40% performance increase when they did that. Yes?
How do you think about which is the most important components to compare OpenStack with other?
So a lot of people talk to me about that. Everyone wants to know whether CloudStack or OpenStack or vCloud. When I look at the other ones out there, most of the other ones don't have all the services that OpenStack has. So for example, both CloudStack as well as vCloud don't have object storage. They just don't have that. They don't have some of these other services like orchestration and things like that. So I think there's a difference there for OpenStack. But really what I spend most of my time today about is block storage, and I think block storage tends to be much better and better support in OpenStack than I see in other ones. And then I spend a lot of time on networking. I think from a compute point of view, I think a lot of them are pretty similar, quite truthfully. I think, if you really, really like Zen Server and you have a huge Zen Server deployment, you may like CloudStack better. It's a Citrix product also. It's integrated with a few other things. If you're a VMware user and a diehard VMware user, and you have all those tools already with vCenter and things like that, you may like vCloud better. I know a lot of people that don't actually, just because of other problems with vCloud, especially the price. But I think it depends on what you want to use it for and what you already have. I think most people though that are starting out, if you don't have anything, I think OpenStack's probably your best solution. Or if you're a service provider, for a service provider, I think it's kind of your only solution today. I don't think either one of the other two are very viable for most service providers out there, either because of cost or because of the number of services that are out there.
I know that
Yeah, so the question there was about bare metal. So CloudStack supports bare metal, but it doesn't support it in the supported version of Citrix. So Citrix doesn't support it, but CloudStack does. There also is bare metal in OpenStack. It's called Ironic. Ironic right now is an incubating project. It's scheduled to be full production in Icehouse, which will be April of next year. People are already using it. ISI Lab in USC is using it. NTT is using it. There's a variety of people that are using bare metal. I think bare metal is going to be very interesting. There's a lot of very good use cases for bare metal that's out there. There are other bare metal solutions out there though. So for example, Canonical has MOS, Metal as a Service, MOS. And there's a few others that are out there also that you can look at. I think the Ironic and OpenStack will be very good because you'll be able to mix it in with your VM and you'll just be able to choose whether you want a virtualized one or you want a bare metal one, and all through the same interface, which I think will be very powerful. But there are other ways to do it too. I think though that a lot of people are going to like that. There are some things which just probably should be on bare metal, and that'll give you that option. And I think that'll let a lot more people actually adopt OpenStack.
그 이제 시간이 많이 지났으니까 마지막으로 질문하실 분이 있으면 한 분만 더 질문을 받고, 뭐 그렇지 않으시면은 이걸로 종료를 하는 게 어떨까 생각하는데,
In case of our company, we opened the public cloud using Pulsar version. At the time, we didn't use Quantum, and we just implemented
Nova Network. Yep.
But after 2 months, we will open VPC service like Amazon service.
Yes.
And then we will use. We will plan to.
Yes.
I wonder. This is I wonder how to implement the controller.
Yeah.
What case? I think 2 options. Separate the controller,
Right.
Or how can mix it? Yes.
Yeah.
Second option.
So I think right now a lot of people are deploying their controllers for Neutron or Quantum separately, just because it's a little more complex. There's a lot of daemons there that need to go there, and they're waiting to see whether or not they may use some different provider there. So I see a lot of people doing that separately from Nova and all these other API controllers there, at least for right now. So I think maybe over time it changes, but right now I would probably implement that on separate servers, especially because you're already on Nova Network and you'll need to migrate over. So I would probably leave that in place, put that on separate machines, and then switch over to it. That would also allow you to switch back if you needed to. So I probably see most people doing that today.
So I think